So this happened last month, and I'm still processing the absolute audacity of these people. I need to get this out because what happened next is going to sound completely unhinged, but I swear every word is true. I'm 24, male, and I was adopted when I was 3. My adoptive parents, William and Fiona, always made sure I knew I was adopted, but in that weird guilt-trippy way where they'd bring it up whenever they wanted something. You know the type. We chose you. We saved you. You should be grateful. Classic manipulation tactics that I didn't recognize until I got older and started putting pieces together. Here's the thing, though. I've been planning for something like this for years. Not this exact scenario, but I knew eventually they'd pull some stunt that would give me the opening I needed. These people raised me, so I know exactly how they think, how they operate, and most importantly, how they justify their actions to themselves. They're predictable in the worst way possible. The college fund situation started when I was 16. My grandfather, on William's side, left me $18,000 specifically for college in his will. Not them. Me. I saw the paperwork. I know what it said. But since I was a minor, it went into an account they controlled. They promised it would be there when I needed it for school. I was stupid enough to believe them. Fast forward to last year when I graduated and wanted to use the money for graduate school. Suddenly there were all these excuses about market losses and unexpected expenses. I knew they were lying, but I couldn't prove it yet. So I played along, got student loans, and started grad school anyway. But I also started documenting everything and quietly building my case. Then last month happened. I was at lunch between classes when I got the text from Fiona that made my blood boil. She didn't even try to ease into it or make excuses anymore. Just straight up told me they spent all $18,000 on their 25th anniversary party. Some ridiculous over-the-top celebration at a fancy venue because they wanted to renew their vows and prove to their friends how successful they are. But wait, it gets worse. She then demanded I pay them another $3,500 for the photographer they hired, or I'm banned from attending the party. Like I would even want to celebrate these thieves at this point. But the real kicker came next. If I don't pay up, they're going to post my adoption documents online for everyone to see. The texts kept coming, and each one was more unhinged than the last. Fiona sent me details about how my birth mother was labeled as a drug addict on my original birth certificate, how my biological father was listed as unknown, and how the adoption agency supposedly marked me as special needs because I cried too much as a toddler. She said they saved me from foster care hell, and I owe them for giving me a life. Then William jumped in with his own messages, talking about how I should be grateful they took in a defective kid that nobody else wanted. He threatened to make sure my coworkers and classmates see exactly where I came from if I don't pay them what they think I owe. I just sat there reading these messages in complete shock. Not because I was hurt or devastated, honestly. I'd suspected something like this was coming for years. What shocked me was how mask-off they went. 21 years of manipulation and control. And this is how they decided to show their true colors. But here's what William and Fiona don't know. I've been preparing for them to do something exactly like this since I turned 18. I spent 6 years quietly gathering information, building relationships, and positioning myself for the moment when they would inevitably reveal who they really are. I knew eventually their greed and need for control would make them slip up. See, while they were busy convincing themselves that I'm just some grateful rescue project who would never stand up to them, I was busy becoming someone they definitely don't want as an enemy. I've been documenting their financial habits, their social connections, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. They think I'm still that scared 3-year-old they adopted. They have no idea who I've become. The moment I finished reading their texts, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't a surprise or an emotional reaction. This was the execution of a plan I'd been refining for years. Every choice I've made since college, every relationship I've built, every skill I've developed has been with this moment in mind. I started with something simple. I took screenshots of every single message they sent me. Not just for evidence, but because I wanted them preserved exactly as they wrote them. Their own words, their own threats, their own admission that they stole money that legally belonged to me. They handed me everything I needed to destroy them, and they don't even realize it yet. Then I did something they definitely weren't expecting. Instead of getting emotional or begging them to reconsider, I sent back exactly one message to each of them. To Fiona, I wrote, "Thank you for finally being honest about who you really are. This makes everything so much easier." To William, I wrote, "You're absolutely right that actions have consequences. You're about to learn that lesson very thoroughly." The response was immediate and exactly what I predicted. Fiona started backtracking, saying she was just upset and didn't mean it that way. William tried to double down and demand I apologize for being disrespectful. But I was already 3 steps ahead of both of them. Because while they were busy typing their threats and insults, I was sending emails. Not angry rants or emotional pleas, but careful, documented reports to exactly the right people who have the power to make their lives very, very complicated. People they don't even know I have connections with, in places they never thought to worry about. The beauty of spending years planning this moment is that I know exactly which pressure points will cause maximum impact with minimum effort on my part. They want to play games with my adoption records and threaten my reputation. Perfect. Let's see how they handle it when their own records start getting some very unwelcome attention. By 6 p.m. that same day, I got the first phone call. Not from William or Fiona, but from someone else entirely. Someone whose voice I recognized but who definitely wasn't expecting to be making this particular call. They sounded confused and more than a little concerned about some information that had recently come to their attention regarding a certain anniversary party and some questionable financial transactions. I answered very politely and confirmed that yes, I would be happy to provide additional documentation if needed. Yes, I had preserved all the relevant communications. And yes, I was absolutely certain about the timeline and the amounts involved. That call lasted exactly 12 minutes. By 10 p.m., my phone was ringing again. This time it was Fiona, and she was screaming. Not the controlled manipulation voice she usually uses, but pure panic. Something about the venue calling them about a fraud investigation. Something about their deposit being frozen. Something about them not understanding how this could have happened. I let it go to voicemail. William left his own message 20 minutes later. Much calmer than Fiona, but I could hear the barely controlled rage underneath. He demanded I call him back immediately and explain what I had done. He said there were serious legal issues developing, and I needed to fix this right now. I deleted that voicemail without listening to the whole thing. But the real confirmation that my plan was working came this morning. My phone rang at 8 a.m., and the caller ID showed a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. When I answered, I heard a voice I definitely wasn't expecting. William's mother, my adoptive grandmother, calling me her only real grandchild and asking if we could meet for coffee this afternoon. Apparently, she's learned some very interesting things about how her son and daughter-in-law have been spending money that wasn't theirs to spend. And apparently she has some very strong opinions about people who steal from family members and then try to cover it up with threats and blackmail. Reddit. I'm sitting here writing this post before I head out to meet with her. And I have to admit, I'm actually enjoying this. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not the one scrambling to manage William and Fiona's chaos. I'm not the one making excuses or trying to keep the peace. They created this mess with their own greed and arrogance, and now they get to figure out how to clean it up. The best part? This is just the beginning. They thought they could threaten me with my adoption records and use my past as a weapon against me. What they don't realize is that they just gave me permission to stop protecting their reputation the way I've been doing for years. Tomorrow, I have another meeting scheduled, not with family this time, but with someone who has the authority to make their little fraud investigation into something much more serious and permanent. Someone who's very interested in hearing about the unauthorized use of funds that were legally designated for a specific purpose. William and Fiona wanted to play hardball with someone they thought was weak and grateful and dependent on their approval. Instead, they just declared war on someone who's been preparing for this fight since before they even knew there was going to be one. I'll update you all after I see what tomorrow brings. Something tells me it's going to be a very interesting week. Update 1. I wasn't expecting this level of response to my last post, but thank you all for the support and advice. Some of you called exactly what was going to happen next, and honestly, it's been a wild few days. Buckle up because this gets so much messier. First, let me address some questions from the comments. Yes, I really have been planning for something like this for years. When you grow up with parents who use manipulation and guilt as their primary parenting tools, you learn to recognize patterns pretty early. I knew they would eventually do something that crossed a line I couldn't ignore, and I wanted to be ready when it happened. For those asking about the legal aspects, stealing money from a designated beneficiary is absolutely a crime, especially when there's documentation showing the funds were specifically left to me. The fact that they then tried to extort more money while threatening to publicly humiliate me just made their case worse. Now, on to what happened after my last post. The coffee meeting with William's mother, my adoptive grandmother Malia, was intense. I've always had a decent relationship with her, but I hadn't seen her much since starting grad school. She's in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and does not mess around when it comes to family money. Turns out, she knew about my inheritance from her late husband because she was the one who helped him set up the specific language in the will. She knew it was supposed to be protected for my education, and she'd been asking William about it periodically over the years. He kept telling her it was safely invested and earning interest for when I needed it. When I showed her the text messages from William and Fiona, about spending the money on their party, she went completely silent for about 30 seconds. Then she asked me to forward every single message to her phone. Then she asked for copies of any bank statements or documentation I had about the original inheritance. Here's where it gets interesting. Malia didn't just get angry, she got strategic. She told me she'd been suspicious about William's financial management for a while because he'd been asking her for loans over the past 2 years. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones. She'd been wondering why someone with his income and Fiona's job would need to borrow money from his elderly mother. She also revealed something I didn't know. William had been telling her that I was ungrateful and causing problems in the family. He'd been setting up a narrative where I was the difficult one who didn't appreciate everything they'd done for me. Classic manipulation, control the information to control the perception. But Malia isn't stupid. She raised William, so she knows exactly how he operates when he's trying to cover something up. The fact that he'd been deflecting her questions about my college fund while simultaneously painting me as ungrateful made perfect sense once she saw those text messages. That evening, Malia called William directly. She didn't tell me she was going to do this, but she filled me in afterwards. She informed him that she wanted to see documentation showing exactly where my inheritance money had gone, and she wanted to see it within 24 hours. When he started making excuses, she cut him off and told him she was considering whether to involve her attorney. William apparently tried to flip the script and claim I was lying about the texts. Big mistake. Malia told him she had screenshots of everything, and if he wanted to call his own mother a liar, he was welcome to do that, but it wasn't going to end well for him. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Fiona and 11 from William. The voicemails started apologetic and got progressively more frantic. Fiona was crying in some of them, talking about how they never meant for things to go this far and how they were just stressed about money. William's messages got increasingly angry, demanding I call them back and accusing me of turning his mother against him. I didn't return any of those calls. Instead, I had my second meeting, the one I mentioned in my last post. This was with someone from the Financial Crimes Division who specializes in cases involving misappropriation of inheritance funds. I brought every piece of documentation I had, including the will, bank statements, and those lovely text messages where William and Fiona openly admitted to spending my money. The detective was very interested in the timeline and the amounts involved. She was especially interested in the fact that they demanded additional money from me, under threat of public humiliation. Apparently, extortion charges can be filed even when the threats involve embarrassing but true information. Who knew? By Wednesday evening, things escalated dramatically. William and Fiona decided to drive to my apartment to confront me in person. I was actually expecting this because it's exactly what William does when he feels like he's losing control of a situation. He shows up uninvited and tries to intimidate people into compliance. They didn't call first. They just appeared at my door around 8 p.m. while I was studying. When I opened the door, Fiona immediately started crying and trying to hug me, talking about how this was all a big misunderstanding and how hurt she was that I'd gotten lawyers involved. William cut straight to the point. He wanted to know exactly who I'd talked to and what I'd told them. He kept insisting that family problems should be handled within the family, not with outsiders. He said I was being vindictive and trying to destroy their reputation over what he called a temporary financial arrangement. This is where I need to give you the full conversation because it really shows how these people think. William started by saying the money was always intended to be used for family expenses and my education was just one of many family priorities. When I pointed out that the will specifically designated the funds for my education only, he claimed that since they were my legal guardians when I received the inheritance, they had discretion over how it was managed. Fiona jumped in with the guilt tactics. She started talking about how expensive it was to raise me, how they'd spent thousands on therapy and special tutoring when I was younger, and how they'd never asked me to pay them back for any of that. She said the anniversary party was a celebration of their marriage, which was also a celebration of the family they'd built by adopting me. I let them talk. I wanted to hear their justifications because I knew this conversation was going to be important later. William kept circling back to the idea that I was being ungrateful and that any decent person would understand that family money should benefit the whole family. Fiona kept crying and asking why I wanted to hurt them when they'd given me such a good life. Then William made the mistake of threatening me again. He said if I didn't drop whatever legal action I'd started, he would make sure everyone in my graduate program knew exactly what kind of person I really was. He said he had documentation about my behavioral problems as a child, and he wasn't afraid to use it to protect his family's reputation. That's when I finally spoke up. I told them I'd recorded every conversation with law enforcement. I'd saved every text message they'd sent me, and I'd already provided copies of everything to multiple people who had the authority to investigate financial crimes. I said their threats were actually making their legal situation worse. Not better. Fiona lost it completely. She started screaming about how I was destroying their lives over money that wouldn't even matter in a few years. She said they'd given me everything, and this was how I was repaying them. She actually said the words, "after everything we've done for you," while crying hysterically. William tried a different approach. He said he could get the money back from the party vendors and pay me in installments if I would just call off whatever investigation I'd started. He said they could work something out as a family without involving law enforcement. I told them it was too late for that. The moment they sent me those texts threatening to humiliate me with my adoption records, they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I said I wasn't interested in payment plans or family negotiations. I was interested in them facing the consequences of their choices. They stayed for almost 2 hours, alternating between apologies, threats, guilt trips, and attempts at negotiation. Nothing worked because I wasn't interested in any of it. Every tactic they tried just confirmed that I'd made the right decision by involving authorities instead of trying to handle this privately. When they finally left, William's parting shot was that I was going to regret destroying my relationship with the only family I'd ever had. He said I was choosing money over family, and I'd end up alone because of my vindictiveness. I closed the door and immediately called Malia to let her know about the visit. She was furious that they'd shown up at my apartment to intimidate me. She said that was exactly the kind of behavior she'd been worried about, and it confirmed her decision to involve her own attorney in reviewing William's management of family financial matters. Here's where things get really interesting, Reddit. Malia revealed that William had actually borrowed money from her last year, specifically for what he claimed were investment opportunities. He'd told her he needed $15,000 to buy into some business deal that would pay off big, and he'd promised to pay her back with interest within 6 months. She never got paid back. Every time she asked about it, William said the investment was still developing and the returns would come eventually. Now she's wondering if that $15,000 went toward their anniversary party planning, just like my inheritance money. The detective I spoke with was very interested in this information when I passed it along. Apparently, a pattern of financial mismanagement involving multiple family members strengthens the case significantly. Yesterday, I got a call from the venue where William and Fiona held their party. They wanted to verify some information about the payment they'd received and whether I had any knowledge of where those funds had come from. I was completely honest about the situation and provided them with copies of the relevant documentation. The venue manager sounded pretty concerned about having accepted payment for services using funds that may have been obtained fraudulently. They said they were conducting their own review of the transaction and might need to provide information to law enforcement if requested. William and Fiona have been calling constantly since Wednesday night. The messages are getting more desperate and more angry. William is now claiming that I'm trying to send him to jail over a simple family disagreement. Fiona is alternating between sobbing apologies and furious accusations that I'm vindictive and cruel. But here's what they don't understand. This isn't vindictiveness. This is accountability. They made choices based on the assumption that I would never stand up to them, that I would always prioritize keeping the peace over protecting myself. They were wrong. I have one more meeting scheduled for next week. This time it's with Malia's attorney, who wants to discuss the broader pattern of financial management issues and what legal options might be available for recovering the various amounts William has borrowed or misappropriated over the years. The best part? William and Fiona still think this is about the money. They keep offering to pay me back or work out payment arrangements. They don't understand that this stopped being about the money the moment they decided to threaten me with my adoption records. They wanted to use my past as a weapon against me. Instead, they handed me everything I needed to expose their present. And unlike them, I don't make empty threats. More updates coming after next week's meeting. Something tells me William and Fiona's problems are just getting started. Update 2. Reddit. I'm back with another update, and honestly, I didn't expect things to move this fast. The comments on my last post were incredible. Shout out to everyone who predicted exactly how this would play out. You all called it perfectly. First, thank you to everyone asking about my mental health and whether I'm handling all this okay. I appreciate the concern, but I want to be clear. I'm not falling apart or having some kind of breakdown. I've been mentally preparing for a confrontation like this for years. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. William and Fiona showed me who they were long before they sent those texts. So here's what happened after my last update. The meeting with Malia's attorney was eye-opening, and I mean that in the best possible way for my case and the worst possible way for William and Fiona. Malia brought documentation going back 5 years showing a pattern of William asking for loans and financial help. It wasn't just the $15,000 I mentioned before. There were smaller amounts. $2,000 here. $3,500 there. always with some story about temporary cash flow problems or investment opportunities. The attorney calculated that William owed his mother over $28,000 in unpaid loans. But here's the really interesting part. Malia had been keeping detailed records because her late husband had always told her to document family financial dealings. Smart woman. She had dates, amounts, and even some text messages where William promised specific repayment dates that he never met. The attorney explained that this pattern strengthened my case significantly. It showed that William had a history of misappropriating family money and failing to repay debts. When combined with the theft of my inheritance and the attempted extortion, it painted a picture of someone who viewed family members as sources of funding rather than people deserving respect. During that meeting, Malia made a decision that surprised me. She told her attorney to send William a formal demand letter for the full amount he owed her, with interest, to be paid within 30 days. She said she was tired of enabling his financial irresponsibility, and it was time for him to face consequences. That letter was delivered on a Thursday. By Friday morning, William was blowing up my phone again, but this time the tone was different. He wasn't trying to manipulate or threaten me anymore. He was panicking. The conversation we had that Friday was probably the most honest discussion William and I have ever had, and it revealed a lot about why he's always treated me the way he has. He started by admitting that he and Fiona were in serious financial trouble. They'd been living beyond their means for years, using credit cards and family loans to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. The anniversary party wasn't just funded with my inheritance money. It was also funded with the money he'd borrowed from Malia and several credit cards they'd maxed out. They spent close to $40,000 on a single party because they wanted to prove to their friends and extended family that they were successful and happy. But here's the part that really got to me. William finally explained why he's always resented me. He said that adopting me was Fiona's idea, not his. He'd wanted to remain child-free, but Fiona had convinced him that adoption would complete their family and make them look more stable and conventional to their social circle. He said he'd never really bonded with me because he'd never wanted children in the first place. Every expense related to raising me, the therapy, the tutoring, the college preparation, felt like money they were spending on Fiona's project rather than their shared future. He'd been keeping a mental tab of what I'd cost them for 21 years. The inheritance from his father was supposed to offset some of those costs in his mind. He genuinely believed that since they'd spent so much money raising me, they deserved to benefit from any money that came my way. He saw it as compensation for their investment in my upbringing. This conversation was brutal to listen to, but it was also liberating. For years, I'd wondered if I was somehow failing as a son or not living up to their expectations. Turns out, the problem was never me. The problem was that William never wanted to be a father, and he'd spent 2 decades resenting both me and Fiona for putting him in that position. Fiona, meanwhile, had been using me as a way to create the perfect family image she wanted to project. She loved having a child when it made her look nurturing and maternal, but she'd never actually developed the emotional skills to handle the challenges that come with parenting. The more William talked, the clearer it became that their marriage had been struggling for years. They'd been using financial success and social status to cover up fundamental incompatibilities and unresolved resentments. The anniversary party was as much about proving their marriage was solid as it was about celebrating it. By the end of that conversation, William was begging me to help him figure out how to make this all go away. He offered to sign over the deed to their house if I would drop the legal proceedings and convince Malia to forgive his debts. He said they could downsize and start over if everyone would just give them another chance. I told him it was too late for that. The moment they decided to steal my money and then threaten me with my adoption records, they made this a legal matter instead of a family matter. I said I wasn't interested in helping them avoid consequences for choices they made as adults. William actually started crying during this conversation. He said he knew he'd been a terrible father, and he was sorry for never really loving me the way he should have. He said he was sorry for resenting me and for taking his frustrations about his marriage out on me. Part of me wanted to feel bad for him, but honestly, hearing him finally admit the truth was more validating than painful. I'd always sensed that something was off about our relationship, that his affection was conditional and performative. Having him confirm it actually felt like closure. The legal proceedings moved forward regardless of William's breakdown. The detective contacted me earlier this week to let me know that formal charges were being filed, both theft and attempted extortion charges, based on the evidence I'd provided and additional information they'd gathered during their investigation. The venue where they held their party provided financial records showing the exact amounts paid and when. The bank provided records showing the depletion of my inheritance account and where that money was transferred. The text messages where they admitted to the theft and threatened me sealed the case. Malia followed through on her demand letter. When William couldn't pay the full amount within 30 days, her attorney filed a civil lawsuit for recovery of the debt plus interest and legal fees. They also placed a lien on William and Fiona's house to secure payment. This is where things get really interesting. William and Fiona tried to refinance their house to pay off their debts, but they couldn't qualify for a loan large enough to cover everything they owed. Between the money they owed Malia, their credit card debt, and the legal fees piling up from both the criminal case and the civil lawsuit, they were looking at debt that exceeded the value of their home. They ended up having to list the house for sale, not because anyone forced them to, but because it was their only option to avoid bankruptcy. Even selling the house, they're going to come up short on what they owe. The best part of all this? Their social circle has started to figure out what's happening. Remember, these people threw a $40,000 anniversary party specifically to impress their friends and maintain their image. Now those same friends are watching them sell their house and face criminal charges for stealing from their adopted son. Fiona called me yesterday, and the conversation was completely different from any previous interaction we've had. No manipulation, no guilt trips, no threats, just desperate honesty about how scared she was and how much she regretted everything that had happened. She admitted that the adoption had been more about fulfilling her image of what her life should look like than about actually wanting to parent a child. She said she'd convinced herself that providing material stability was the same thing as providing love and emotional support. She also admitted that she'd known William resented me, but she'd ignored it because she'd wanted the family dynamic to work so badly. She'd spent years making excuses for his emotional distance and convincing herself that he'd eventually come around. The conversation lasted over an hour, and by the end, Fiona was acknowledging that they'd never really treated me like a son. They'd treated me like a project they'd invested in and expected returns from. She said she understood why I wasn't willing to help them now, and she didn't blame me for protecting myself. I didn't forgive her. I didn't offer to help, but I did appreciate her honesty. After 21 years of manipulation and performance, hearing her finally acknowledge the truth about our relationship was something I needed. The criminal trial is scheduled for next month. The civil case with Malaya will probably take longer, but the outcome seems pretty clear. William and Fiona are going to lose their house, face financial ruin, and probably see at least some jail time. Their marriage probably won't survive this either. The stress of the legal and financial problems has exposed all the underlying issues they'd been avoiding for years. William is still angry that Fiona pushed for the adoption in the first place. Fiona is angry that William never tried to be the father she wanted him to be. I feel vindicated, I guess. Not happy about their suffering, but satisfied that the truth is finally out in the open. For years, I felt like something was wrong with me because I couldn't earn their genuine love and respect. Now I know the problem was never me. The money they stole is gone, and I'll probably never recover most of it. But watching them face real consequences for their choices, seeing their carefully constructed image crumble, and finally understanding the truth about our family dynamic, that's worth more than $18,000. Next update will probably be after the trial. Thanks again for all the support, Reddit. This community has been incredible through this whole process. Final update. Reddit, this is it. The final chapter of this absolute mess. Thank you to everyone who followed this story from the beginning and provided support along the way. You all called exactly how this would end, and honestly, watching it all play out has been both satisfying and exhausting. The criminal trial happened last month, and the results were everything I hoped for and more. William and Fiona both pled guilty to the theft charges rather than risk going to trial. Their attorney advised them that with the text message evidence where they openly admitted to stealing my money, plus the bank records and witness testimony, they had no chance of winning if it went before a jury. William got 18 months in county jail plus 3 years probation. Fiona got 12 months plus 2 years probation since the court determined William was the primary instigator. They also have to pay restitution, though, as you'll see, that's complicated by their financial situation. The attempted extortion charges were harder to prove intent on, so those got dropped as part of the plea agreement. The prosecutor said the theft conviction was the important thing, and the jail time would send the right message about financial abuse within families. Watching them in court was surreal. These people who had controlled and manipulated me for 21 years looked small and defeated, sitting at the defendant's table. William kept staring at the floor during the sentencing. Fiona cried the entire time, but not the manipulative crying I was used to. This was genuine fear and regret. The judge was not sympathetic. She said financial abuse of family members, especially involving inheritance funds, represented a particularly cruel betrayal of trust. She said the attempted extortion using adoption records showed a level of calculated cruelty that warranted serious consequences. Malia's civil lawsuit resolved around the same time. William and Fiona's house sold, but after paying off their mortgage and other debts, there wasn't enough left to pay her back in full. She ended up settling for about 60% of what William owed her, plus her legal fees. Here's where things get really interesting, though. The house sale and legal proceedings revealed the true extent of William and Fiona's financial problems. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were completely underwater financially and had been for years. The anniversary party wasn't just funded with my inheritance and Malia's money. They'd also taken cash advances on multiple credit cards, borrowed against William's retirement account, and even gotten a loan using their car as collateral. The total debt they'd accumulated was over $85,000, most of it at high interest rates. When everything was said and done, they had to declare bankruptcy anyway. The house sale covered some of their debts, but nowhere near all of them. They lost everything: the house, both cars, most of their possessions. They're currently living in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of town they used to look down on. But wait, it gets better. Remember how this whole thing started because they wanted to impress their social circle with an extravagant anniversary party? Well, their social circle has completely abandoned them. Turns out, people who judge you based on wealth and status aren't very loyal when both of those things disappear. The friends who attended their $40,000 party won't return their calls now that everyone knows how it was funded. The couple who used to host them for fancy dinner parties suddenly became unavailable. The social climbing that was so important to them for decades evaporated overnight. Fiona called me right before William started his jail sentence. This conversation was different from any we'd ever had. She wasn't trying to manipulate me or gain sympathy. She was calling to apologize and to tell me she finally understood why I'd done what I did. She said the last few months had forced her to confront how she'd treated me for my entire life. She said she'd always known deep down that William resented my presence, but she'd been so focused on maintaining the image of a happy family that she'd ignored the emotional damage being done. She admitted that she'd used me as a prop in her perfect family fantasy rather than loving me as an actual person. She said she'd never learned how to handle the reality of parenting because she'd been more interested in how motherhood looked from the outside than how it felt on the inside. The most honest thing she said was that she'd never really considered what I needed emotionally because she'd been so focused on what I could provide for her self-image. She said she understood now that the way they'd treated me was a form of emotional abuse, even if they'd never intended it that way. I listened to everything she had to say, but I didn't forgive her. I told her I appreciated her honesty and her willingness to acknowledge the truth, but that didn't erase 21 years of manipulation and conditional love. I said I hoped she would use this experience to become a better person, but I wouldn't be part of that journey. She accepted that. She said she didn't expect forgiveness and she understood why I needed to protect myself from further harm. She said she was proud of me for standing up for myself and not allowing them to continue taking advantage of me. William never called me. Malia spoke to him before he went to jail and said he was still angry about the whole situation. He blamed me for ruining his life and destroying his marriage. He said if I'd just paid the photographer fee like they asked, none of this would have happened. Even facing jail time and financial ruin, William couldn't accept responsibility for his choices. He still saw me as the problem rather than recognizing that his decision to steal my money and then threaten me had created this entire situation. Fiona and William's marriage didn't survive the stress. They filed for divorce while William was in jail. Fiona said she finally realized that their relationship had been built on shared delusions about who they were and what they deserved rather than genuine love and compatibility. She moved back to her home state to live with her sister while they both serve their probation terms. William will probably do the same when he gets out of jail, assuming Fiona doesn't take him back, which seems unlikely at this point. The financial restitution I'm owed will probably never be paid in full. Between their bankruptcy and their current income levels, I might see a few $100s here and there over the next several years, but the $18,000 is essentially gone forever. But here's the thing, I don't care about the money anymore. What I wanted was for them to face real consequences for their actions and for the truth about our family dynamic to come out. Both of those things happened. For years, I felt like I was crazy for thinking something was fundamentally wrong with how they treated me. I wondered if I was ungrateful or difficult or somehow failing as a son. Now I know the problem was never me. The problem was that they adopted a child for the wrong reasons and then spent 2 decades resenting both me and each other for the situation they'd created. Malia and I have developed a much closer relationship through all of this. She's been incredibly supportive and has made it clear that she considers me her real grandson, regardless of the adoption circumstances. She's helped me understand more about the family history and has shared stories about my grandfather that William never told me. She's also been honest about William's character flaws and how they developed over time. Apparently, he'd always been selfish and entitled, But marriage to Fiona had amplified those traits because they enabled each other's worst impulses. The most satisfying part of this whole experience has been watching their carefully constructed image completely crumble. These people spent decades judging others, looking down on anyone who didn't meet their standards of success and respectability. Now they're the ones being judged and found wanting. Their former friends whisper about them at social gatherings. Their neighbors know they're convicted thieves. Their coworkers know they embezzled family money to pay for a party. The reputation they cared so much about protecting is destroyed permanently. But beyond the satisfaction of seeing justice served, this experience has been liberating for me personally. For the first time in my life, I don't have to manage their emotions or worry about earning their approval. I don't have to pretend that our relationship was normal or healthy. I can acknowledge the truth about what happened and move forward without their dysfunction weighing me down. I'm finishing graduate school this year, and I've been accepted to a PhD program at a university across the country. I'm planning to relocate and start completely fresh somewhere that has no connection to William and Fiona or their social circle. Malia has already said she'll visit me wherever I end up, and I'm looking forward to building a relationship with her that's based on genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. Some people have asked if I feel guilty about what happened to William and Fiona. The answer is no. They made their choices as adults. They chose to steal my money. They chose to threaten me with my adoption records. And they chose to live beyond their means for years, while lying to everyone around them. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply refused to enable their destruction of mine. Everything that happened to them was a direct result of their own actions. If they'd paid for their anniversary party with their own money and treated me with basic respect, none of this would have happened. The most important lesson I've learned from this experience is that family isn't just about blood or legal relationships. Family is about people who love and support you unconditionally, who want the best for you even when it's inconvenient for them, and who treat you with respect and dignity. William and Fiona were never really my family in that sense. They were people who took legal responsibility for me but never accepted the emotional responsibility that should come with that. They saw me as an investment that should provide returns rather than a person deserving of love. I spent 21 years trying to earn something they were never capable of giving. Now I'm free to find people who actually deserve my love and loyalty and who will offer the same in return. To anyone reading this who's dealing with family members who treat you as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of respect, you don't owe them your silence or your protection. You have the right to stand up for yourself and demand better treatment. And if they refuse to change, you have the right to walk away. Blood doesn't excuse abuse. Legal relationships don't justify manipulation. And family that makes you feel worse about yourself isn't family worth keeping. Thanks again to everyone who supported me through this journey. Your comments and advice meant more than you know. I'm finally free to build the life I actually want instead of the life they expected me to be grateful for. William and Fiona wanted me to remember that I owe them everything. Instead, they taught me that I owe them nothing. And that's the most valuable lesson they ever gave me, even if they didn't mean to teach it.